Right, hello guys, and today we are going to be talking about Time of Contempt by Andrzej Sapkowski. I'm still going with that, Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the second book in the this is the second novel in the Witcher series, but there are two short story collections that precede those. So I guess technically it's the fourth book in the series. Yeah, and it's like a dark fantasy series anyway. So yeah, we rejoin the story with what's Geralt doing? Geralt is he's like taking a load of jobs fighting monsters for like small amounts of cash, and Ciri and Yennefer are on their way to the Isle of the Isle of Thanedd, which has got this like magical college on it where Ciri is going to train to be a sorceress. Now Ciri is not too happy about this because she thinks she's going to be like a prisoner there. She's not going to have any freedom to do whatever it is she wants to do. Not sure that she knows what she wants to do. So she runs off to find Geralt, which she manages, and then the three of them get involved in like the political games that are going on between the wizards on the one hand and the rulers of the northern kingdoms on the other hand. This then kind of reaches a climax, which I won't spoil, and the three of them get separated, and sort of meanwhile the Nilfgaardian Empire, who are sort of the big bad guys, they begin like a war of conquest against the northern kingdoms with the help of I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. With the help of random elven word, the help of these anti-human forces, these anti-human factions, made up of like various elements of the elves and the other non-human races. I guess that's about as far as I'm going to go without getting too spoilery. So yeah, I guess, is it any good? Because I'd heard that this was one of the weaker entries in the Witcher series, but personally I actually enjoyed it far more than the first book. I wasn't really a huge fan of the first book, but I thought this one was a big step up, and actually kind of more on a par with the first short story collection, which is called The Last Wish, which I also thought was really good. So yeah, a return to form from Andrzej Sapkowski, in my opinion. So what is good about it? Well, Sapkowski, he sets the scene and reintroduces the characters really well early in the book. You've got like the fractured relations between the human and the non-human races, and between the Nilfgaardian Empire and the northern kingdoms, set up really nicely. And Geralt's identity as a sort of subversion of the traditional hero is established very quickly. It's made clear that he sees himself as a professional rather than someone who's chasing the heroic ideal for its own sake, and that he's like consciously neutral in terms of the politics of the various kingdoms and races, and that he sees himself as an outsider, basically. In his own words, he's a freak and an anachronism. But in spite of this, it's pretty clear that he's got a strong moral compass, and that there's like a lot of compassion lurking pretty close to the surface. Now, in terms of the plot, I think this was really a book of two halves for me. Like, in the first half, the politics are the key thing. The politics are very important. Sapkowski uses the dialogue really well, both to set up the political situation and to explore the ethics of different characters' views. There's some really great conversations between Geralt and the lawyer, Codringer, near the beginning of the book, and also between Geralt and some of the wizards at this banquet that he's basically forced to go to. And they really reminded me of some of the dialogue from the first short story collection, from The Last Wish. I thought that was actually one of the strongest elements of The Last Wish was the dialogue. But I mean, honestly, it was fairly evident in Blood of Elves, in the last book in the series. Yeah, which was a real shame because, like I say, it was one of the strongest elements of his writing. So it was great to see more of it in this one. Yeah, and Geralt and Yennefer's relationship as well was a really interesting feature of this book, I thought. There's like clearly loads of emotion there, but also a lot of toxicity, and it's clearly not a healthy relationship. There's this chapter near the middle of the book somewhere where Geralt he's sort of recounting to Yennefer this conversation that he's had with the leader of the wizards, Vilgefortz, I think his name is. And it really hammers that home, the state of their relationship. I won't go into it too much, I don't want to spoil it. But yeah, I thought that was some really good writing. And, it advanced the plot and it advanced the character relationships really well. Now, the second half of the book is a bit different. It's much more action heavy, which was great as far as I was concerned, because basically I've been waiting a book and a half for some action. It's taken that long to get basically any action. There was a tiny bit in Blood of Elves, but nowhere near enough for me. And there's also some really strong character development for Geralt and for Ciri. There's this bit where Dandelion, one of the other characters, basically Geralt's best mate, is filling Geralt in on the progress of the war with Nilfgaard. And Geralt comes to this realization that in fact something that Ciri said to him earlier was right. And I think the phrase is, neutrality is always contemptible, or something along those lines anyway. And now we don't really see the impact of this epiphany that he has in this book, but I'm predicting that is going to have a big impact on his actions for the rest of the series. It seemed like a big character moment, that. And then on the other hand, you have Ciri, and she has this pretty poignant moment where she realizes that she's only been taught to help people by killing. She's had a Witcher training and a sorceress training, and that has only taught her to help people by killing. And that does have a pretty obvious impact on her decisions later in the book. And it will be interesting to see how that develops as the series progresses. But yeah, that being said, I did have a couple of little gripes, but happily not that many. The biggest one was that the politics were really very convoluted. There's like loads of kingdoms and rulers and factions to keep track of, and to be honest, I did have trouble keeping them all in my head. Like, it would really have helped a lot if there'd been like just a map and perhaps a list of the major characters at the start of the book, because there's a lot of names to keep track of and a lot of places, and you don't really have an idea of where all these places are in relation to each other, which obviously has a big impact on their political relations. Plenty of other books you'll have, fantasy books or whatever, you'll have like just a map at the beginning. So you've got a basic idea of the geography of the world, and like I say, I think that would have really helped. So what I ended up doing was I looked on the internet, and I did find a map on the internet, but I was already like 2/3 of the way through the book at that point. If I'd had it from the beginning, it would really help. So yeah, there you go. There's a recommendation for you. Before you start reading this book, or even this series, in fact, have a look on the internet, find a map, and I think that will really help or it would certainly have helped me to just keep all of the politics in my head and understand exactly what all of these interactions meant. Yeah, and the other little gripe I had, it's only a little one, and I mean, the map thing was only a little one as well, and like I say, you can solve that yourself. But the other little gripe I had was that there were some concepts that are discussed by the characters at various points that don't seem to fit the technology level of the world. We're talking a world with swords and knights and crossbows, like, mid to late medieval level of technology. But then they're talking about concepts like ozone or genetics, and it just seemed a little bit out of place to me. And I don't know if this is something to do with the fact that it's a translation, you know what I mean? Like, so for example, the concept of genetics, maybe that was supposed to be translated as heredity or as like bloodline or something like that, but when the book's been translated from the original Polish, it's got translated as genetics. Maybe it was that, maybe it's supposed to be genetics, I don't know, but that might be an explanation for it. But it did just, bring you out of it a little bit, bring you out of that suspension of disbelief that you've got to have with any novel. But yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with this novel. I was pretty disappointed with the first one in the series, especially because I'd heard so much hype about it, and also because I'd read the first short story collection and I'd really enjoyed that. And a lot of the elements from that short story collection just weren't there in the first novel. And, while there's still not the fairy tale retelling aspect in the novels that I did enjoy from the short stories, I thought Sapkowski's writing was back up to that level in terms of the dialogue, particularly was much better. And the characterization, I thought, also the humour. I didn't mention the humour. Honestly, there's some really nice, funny moments in the conversations throughout this book, especially the first half with Geralt. But yeah, after reading this one, I'm way more excited to carry on with the series. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting on to the next book. I'll read that next month at some point. But yeah, I guess that's all. So goodbye, I suppose.